Hi, Altaz. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Are we live with folks?
Yep, I think we're getting ready to go live, so we can just go dark on our mics now.
Okay. And sorry, and do I back to sharing?
Yep,
I'll
we'll
just
share the same way that you did it before.
share content. Um, well,
So you may not be able to do it because Raquel needs to give you access. She's presenting it right now.
oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. I was getting
All good.
anxious.
No, all good. Cool.
Thank you.
Mhm.
All right, hello everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. Today's session is on the 2021 State of Cloud Adoption Report, our key findings and recommendations for improving cloud security. In this webinar, you will learn more about the current state of cloud adoption and security based on a recently released research study, the State of Cloud Adoption in 2021. This study examined the business drivers and challenges faced by individuals in medium and large enterprises who are directly involved in the development, deployment, or operation of their organization's cloud applications. It will also provide key insights into how you can refine your cloud adoption strategy to better enable a remote workforce and best practices for delivering compliant, secure applications faster. Now, before I introduce you to our speakers, let's quickly go through some housekeeping items. A recording of this webinar will be available after today's event. You will receive an email with the link to the recording, as well being published in the resources section of our website. We encourage everyone to raise questions, so please submit your questions into the Q&A and chat box, and we will address them throughout today's session. Lastly, if you would like to follow up with us or you have a topic you'd like to see covered in a future webinar, please email us at contact@securitycompass.com. I'm pleased to introduce you to today's speakers. Altaz Villani, Director Insights Research at Security Compass, and we are joined by Gary Edwards, co-founder and CEO of Golfdale Consulting. Without further ado, Gary, I will make you our presenter and you can take it from here.
Thank you so much, Raquel. It's such a pleasure to join you here today, Altaz. I'm just going to, well, looks like Raquel will need your help. I'm There we go.
Mhm.
We're using the cloud today, so I hope those who are watching us get going here understand any ironies as we embark on this. There we are. And here we are. So I'll just confirm with you, Altez, you can see the cloud adoption, the overall findings that we're going to share today. And
Looks
it
great.
certainly is a pleasure. Yeah, it's certainly a pleasure to meet with you. Let me walk you through some, I'm going to offer some key observations from what we learned from this research, and then definitely look to you for some insights into what it all means. First, I'd like to start with, well, who did we speak to? Now, we talked to people who were quite competent at assessing cloud adoption for products that their company develops. I think what makes this study a little different than others, there's been quite a bit of research on cloud adoption, as you know, Altez, but what makes this one different is our focus was on medium and mostly large size enterprises, and our curiosity attended to applications that they develop, and not just the ones that they purchase or lease or rent for others. We want to really understand the product development cycle, cloud adoption, and what it means from a security standpoint. As you can see here, we talked to people from, I won't go through all of them, but you can see here, we're competent in understanding the infrastructure, software development, obviously cyber information security, et cetera. And then we did see quite a range of roles spanning from the top of these enterprises, right from the C-suite, almost a third of the respondents, down to individual contributors. But we're primarily concerned, as you can see here, just 1% on the individual contributors side. We're primarily interested in people who managed these processes to get their insights again into cybersecurity and the world of cloud adoption for products that companies build. And just a final note on this, we spoke to 150 folks from a panel survey that we did, and it spanned both the US, which is about 3/4 of the respondents we spoke to, and the UK, which represented about 25% of who we spoke to. Size of the companies I already mentioned.
Yeah. Sorry, Gary, if you can go back,
sorry,
I'd like to add a
please.
comment to that, actually. It's a really,
Please.
really interesting slide here. Anytime we've got any kind of a disruptive technology, the implementation or the rollout of a program around that, in this case, we're talking about a cloud enablement program, for example, it really does require that senior management buy-in in order to help drive and align the necessary priorities within the organization. So it's noteworthy that in this particular survey, they were included in this. And so the responses that we've got, I think, it just validates some of the things that they're looking for. And as we go through the deck and we see a lot of the data points, I think we have to tie it back to what value ultimately is security going to provide when it comes to cloud enablement. I think also noteworthy in this slide, Gary, is on the left-hand side, you see where cyber information security, it's 9%. So the people that we interviewed are not necessarily coming from the security background. What an opportunity to go in and help enable what they're looking for in terms of the value. So I just wanted to add a couple of points in there. Sorry, keep going, Gary. Looks good.
No, those are excellent points. Well, the other thing we looked at, Altez, was just the size of the companies. And size here is measured. Our interest was, as it's shown, is how many developers, especially just like full-time headcount of your software engineering team. And you can see here that we spoke to quite a span. We wanted to make sure that it was sizable in terms of, there's a lot of research out there that focuses on smaller enterprise, and certainly they need to be concerned about cybersecurity. But we were after kind of the big kids on the block, who's got at least 100. And as you can see here, if you look to the far right, 1,000 or more, we've got over 50% of our the respondents that we're speaking to coming from very large enterprises with very large teams that all need to worry about cybersecurity. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So if you'll notice this graph, it tends to be left skewed in a way. Like we see most of it on the upper end, 500 plus. And usually when we try to think about scaling cloud, we start with a few data points and then we try to generalize this to something that's bigger, larger, and we try and gain some insights that way. Whereas if we start with something that is already complicated, and these are large organizations with large portfolios of applications, then once we understand in that case what these challenges are, we can oftentimes remove the constraints or the assumptions that we make around that complexity. And it allows us to now scale down and kind of do it that way. It's just in terms of looking at how we could take an insight and we can scale it out, I think this is something important to keep in mind. We have literally hit that group that has this large portfolio, large organizations, and they're dealing with this complexity. And so if it works for them, or if these are the issues they're facing, eventually as other organizations also begin to scale up, they're going to run into some of these things. And the issue now is, how do I avoid some of this, or how do I prepare for some of these things? So let's kind of keep that in mind as well. There's part of this education that needs to happen as we scale out as well. And as we go through this, as we'd mentioned at the start of this webinar, this really is conversational. This is Gary and I are sitting down having a conversation as part of the security community. Feel free to add your questions, your thoughts, what you're seeing. If you agree, disagree, that would be wonderful. Gary, over to you.
Thank you. We mentioned the size of the engineering teams, and this is really just to reinforce your point, but we were also curious, of course, how big are these companies? And you can see, over 2/3, 69% were $1 billion plus. These are large, complex enterprises that span globally, would span many different products. And to your point, Altez, about scaling, we're showing a static number, as you know. These are fluid numbers. Companies are always either growing or shrinking. They never stay the same. So the importance of speaking to the folks who are managing that size, scale, and complexity is something that this research pointed to.
Yeah, and if you look at it, the mid-sized companies, so to speak, like we're looking at that sort of 1 billion range at that point. This is an area where we're finding there's a great deal of interest in the cloud. It's growing companies. They're in that space right now where they need to figure out, how do we expand our cloud-enabled applications, and at the same time, they need to do it in a way that is secure. So this is not surprising to go in and to see this kind of a distribution where there's a lot of players in this mid-market space, as they search to now kind of move forward as well. So keep in mind, again, I want to tie it back to, this doesn't include just the practitioners, but it includes the broad range. We've got executives in here. We've got people that are literally doing the development work and so on.
Fantastic. Well, we mentioned that they have to be qualified. We made sure we asked, and there's no, sometimes we get complicated in research, Altez, and sometimes we just get really straightforward. And in this case, we wanted to talk to people who really understood the tools that they used for application security and cloud security. And again, throughout this, that their company develops and deploys. So not just adopts someone else's software. They have to be actively involved and actively understanding the various tools, applications, processes, et cetera, that they were using. Otherwise, we passed in terms of them participating in this study.
Yeah, and that's really important as the principal decision maker in AppSec and cloud security software. Like, if you look at where we are today from a DevOps perspective, we have these software delivery pipelines. And what's happening is these are being incorporated into cloud-native based applications at this point. So there are several key issues that emerge from this now. So for example, how do we ensure that we've got the proper cloud security config in place? How do we, for example, go in and tie security frameworks and standards as we consider cloud? How do we move from a perimeter-based security model to something that is more policy-driven, for example? And it's important to get the right audience in this. So these are the people that are making these decisions, and the questions, when we've spoken to people, these are the kinds of things that emerge now as we continue the dialogue and have these discussions with them. How do we go in and how do we ensure that security is going to both enable the business and at the same time help them manage the risk?
Absolutely. You know, what we like to do in research sometimes, Altez, is correlate things. And when we think back to the earlier slide around, look, just 9% of people were directly involved in cybersecurity itself. That wasn't their job. Still, we see that here, 75% still hold a principal decision-making role in application security and or cloud security software. So I think
Yeah.
that's another point to bring to the table, which is it's not just the highly technical expert, but sometimes the person that oversees that expert or is tied very much to what they bring to the table. They have to be knowledgeable as well.
Absolutely, Gary. So you're you're opening up another webinar. So when we take a look at it, it's like we've got, competencies and governance and all that sort of fits into this space. Now, this is, for today's purposes, this is a top level, discussion, and we're talking about what we saw from the results of the survey that we conducted. But there's, when you drill down further, there's a lot that comes out of this kind of data point.
Fantastic. Well, we've made sure that they were involved with the development, deployment, the operations. And I don't know if you have a comment on this, or we just want to check the boxes here as well, Altez, that we were speaking to the right people at the right level, who had the right level of knowledge.
Yeah. I'd just like to call out, and this was really interesting for me, that there's a lot of emphasis on the development side of things, and it's about leveraging the cloud from a development context. So when we take a look at a disruptive technology like cloud, ultimately any disruptive technology, the goal is to go in and look for ways to provide like new services or enhance existing services. And it requires a new way of thinking in terms of how we're going to scale to the cloud. Just going with this classic lift and shift model, it doesn't always work well. So it's not surprising. There's probably some re-engineering that needs to happen, a lot of development and rethinking about things like architectures, and we'll get into some of these things later on. But this is where this is all sort of kicking in at this point. There is mainstream adoption for the cloud. The question is, how do we now do this in a way that enables us to retain the security models and as we start to move into this hybrid infrastructure model with cloud native applications and on-prem applications.
Interesting. Well, we asked, now we get into the content really of, what kind of our discovery, and we asked, who has responsibility? Again, I'll just keep emphasizing for applications that their company develops and deploys. And as you can see here, almost 2/3, 63%, saying it's the head of tech, the CTO. Just 4%, the CPO or head of product. Anything surprising coming out of this, Altez?
Yeah, so when I see this data here, to me, when I see the CTO or head of tech kind of being that responsible role for cloud adoption, what I think about is really value streams at the end of the day. When you look at cloud development, ultimately, the goal is to go in and produce some value back to the business. There's going to undoubtedly be some kind of a tech stack that enables this. And who better than the head of technology to go in there and lead the charge on taking a look at this, this stack that we've got. And you don't create a stack in isolation. You create that stack based on discrete, small pipelines or processes, which you integrate together into a broader pipeline, which you then go as a value stream. And every part of that value stream is, in fact, offering some value back to the business. Now, what that value is contextual to an organization. It may be something related to speed to market. It may be something related to compliance. It may be something related to risk reduction. It might be, and there's some additional data later on when we take a look at, it may be part of going digital, which is a really big part of many organizations today. So there's a rationalization effort that needs to happen. So you're redefining what your tech stack looks like, for example. And I think hand in hand with this, when we talk about the value streams, you can't disconnect this from the capabilities. Development capabilities evolve as we start to take a look at what's happening in the cloud. And so it's not surprising to me to see the head of technology being in that space. Now, when we look at head of products, generally, when it comes to particularly combination of hardware, software related things, whether it's in the IoT space or just products that involve like firmware or things like that. There is a head of product that oversees some of these things, and usually that role works hand in hand with the counterpart on the software development side. So it's interesting to me to see that we see such a large amount on sort of the CTO or head of technology. But in my discussions, I've also seen that from a head of product perspective, there's sort of that counterpart as well. So we've got head of tech and we've got head of product, and we've got the hardware and the software sort of coming together as we try and develop these applications securely through cloud-enabled instances and ephemeral systems and APIs and things like that.
Very, very interesting. Well, let's look at cloud application adoption. We asked several questions, and first was we'd asked, how many are they developing, and then from that we asked, based on what their answer was, you can see here, you had said that the respondents had said that their company had developed, X number of applications, and a certain percentage of these are on premise. And so what we were wondering then is, of the ones that are on premise, how many of these are expected to be migrating to the cloud in the next 2 years? So again, we're giving you just some highlights. There's lots of data in behind this, and I'm sure you're going to tell our listeners where and how they can access all of this information. But we wanted to jump right to, based on the number of apps you developed, you can see that across the bottom, what percentages of these are going to go to the cloud in the next 2 years? We've got an average here of 60, median the same. Any surprises in this, Altaz?
So what this indicates to me, Gary, is there's a rationalization effort that's taking place. We have applications on-prem today, and what we're trying to do is migrate these over to the cloud. And there may be valid business reasons for doing that. We described some of them earlier. It may be based on productivity, maybe based on cost, maybe based on security, maybe based on compliance, any number of reasons. But the expectation now that we're going to take at least half our applications over the next 2 years and migrate these over to the cloud. So it's not cloud native, it's just taking the application and rationalizing it to the cloud. It may require some rework, it may require some recoding. So it's not surprising to some of the earlier data points that we saw where development is very much amplified compared to what we see in the rest of the sort of the life cycle. But I want to call out here, when we rationalize, historically, when you talk about rationalization, usually the focus is on rationalizing for cost. And I think we have an opportunity as a security community here. As we look to migrate to the cloud, what can a security team do now to offer that business value, tying back to that value stream concept we talked about earlier? How do we go in there and map this as the migrations are happening to go in there and enable what that head of tech and ultimately what the business is looking for? So it's not about kind of putting in the blockers that say you cannot do this, you cannot do that. It really is shifting the conversation to say, you're migrating, we're going to come alongside and let's work with you to ensure that we're going to create a set of applications in the future which have security in them. Not only that, but let's talk about how we might be able to go and instrument some of this so that we can determine how we're going to monitor the security of these applications on an ongoing basis. So to me, when I see data like this, for the mid to large companies, for people who claim that they're actually in this and they get it and they're responsible for this, there's a serious effort underfoot right now to take over half the applications and migrate them over to the cloud. So I see this as a tremendous opportunity for security teams to come in now, and we're seeing within the industry there's work being done to go and take a look at how do you help with cloud and what are some of the things you need to think about. So Cloud Security Alliance, for example, does some good work on that. SafeCode does some good work in that space. The Open Group does some good stuff. So there are all these communities coming together to help us get where we need to go. So it's encouraging to see that this is like there's an intersection of the need as well as the generation of some of these frameworks to enable some of this to happen.
Fascinating. Well, we also asked what percentage of new applications still under development are not yet deployed are cloud-based. And again, we see some fairly high percentages here, approximately half.
Yeah. Yeah, this is interesting. So the value proposition of the cloud, this is where it really sort of comes out. It's attractive. You know, we're about half of our applications that are under development are in fact cloud native at this point. And the cloud is essentially being embraced. We need to go and again, be able to help to construct ways of enabling how through the pipelines as these teams are developing, the guardrails that need to be put in place so that as teams are doing this, they don't need to necessarily think about security. They run it through these pipelines. If they happen to hit one of the bands, then it triggers a discussion. Let's talk about it. Do we need to modify a policy? Is there something to do with sort of our ground-based applications that now, when we look at cloud-based applications, we need to modify, for example? You know, that's the kind of thing that needs to happen. So when I see that the mean, the median is all kind of, you know, relatively close to each other, to me, that indicates that we've got this, you know, even spread at this point. It's not like wide skews. This is, you know, a really good data point to suggest that when we look at moving over into cloud-based applications, about half of these applications are being developed as cloud native applications. So if you forecast this into the future, you know, once these are in the cloud, what do we now need to do when they're there? Do we need to go in there and construct new novel ways of thinking about security, for example? So, you know, when we look at perimeter-based model, as I described earlier, we now take a look at hybrid infrastructures. And so zero trust begins to kick in. And what do we now do from a security standpoint to try and elevate security into the application and data space, which gets into data classification and some of these kinds of security sort of data points that we need to take further. So there's a huge, huge opportunity here to go in. And, you know, again, to an earlier slide, the people that responded to this don't come from this background. So we can help them. You know, there's a large group of applications that are on-prem that are moving, and we've got another set of applications that are being developed cloud native as well.
Interesting. As a part of this exercise, before we launched our survey, I went back and did some secondary research, you know, just looking through both the academic and the business literature to see, well, what were the projections in this area? You know, as like in 2018, as the cloud was, you know, just bursting at the seams, lots of people were going cloud-based, and it had really become the rage. There was at that time a projection that, you know, we'd be at around 30%, and that was a you know, a big and aggressive forecast at the time. And here what we see is, and I don't know, would you think it's COVID or just the movement of technology in general? That 30%, which seemed aggressive at the time, now was obviously an underestimate. The forecast missed because it's actually looking like 50%.
Yeah, I think, you know, honestly, I think COVID has some role to play in some of this. That's just a personal opinion. I think as we move to a remote workforce, a lot of the cloud-based applications are becoming attractive, but that's not the only thing, right? We were engaged in cloud-based development even before. When we consider some of the benefits of the cloud around scalability, for example, the ability to go in there and sort of look at the infrastructure and be able to instantiate things fairly rapidly. Like these are all things that become quite useful in that sense.
Interesting. Well, let's look at, as you know, there's lots of challenges and some great opportunities. Some great things are happening, and we can't pick up, you know, you can't pick up any kind of news device now. And here's some terrifying news as well, just around some of the challenges and opportunities that the public faces. And if that's the case, then obviously there's real challenges that the professionals inside these enterprises face in trying to set standards for cybersecurity and move at the pace that they need to. So one of the things we asked there is, again, quite straightforward. What are the key challenges you face internally with these initiatives? Again, always emphasizing these are for applications that their company develops, and we let them pick more than one. See an interesting distribution here. Security requirements, integration with other on-premises technology, definitely at the top of the list. All the way to the right, political organizational challenges. I'm sure, you know, the siloed things that we hear of a lot, vendor lock-in, trying to reduce that some of those tensions that exist, Any surprises in here, Altez, in terms of what you see as the key challenges?
Yeah, it's really interesting. We used to talk a lot about vendor lock-in in the past, but it seems like that's not kind of a, it's important, but it's not as important anymore. Maybe we can, while we're discussing this, also throw up that first poll, and let's see what the audience thinks about this as well. When we look at our whole sort of set of internal challenges that we have here, when we see that security requirements are top at this point, that indicates that we've moved away from looking at security from a post-deployment situation to something that is really moving on earlier in the life cycle. So we're going to see security requirements and the generation of these requirements become important. Not only that, but we now start to get into architectural discussions. So it's not just about the requirements, but we take it one step over, and it's like, how do we ensure that we've got sort of cloud to ground, ground to cloud kinds of integrations? Right, some of these challenges begin to emerge now as well. And then moving on, looking for resources. This we know is a common problem. So the challenge is going to be, how do we take security and how do we fan it out? How do we socialize this in a way that we can get more people involved when it comes to developing things in the cloud that are really aligned with best security practices? So these are the kinds of things that we start to see. It's when I look at where my discussions within the industry are headed, it really is moving towards policy-driven security. So if we take a policy-driven security model and bring that into software development, how do we go and construct a set of security requirements through some kind of policy engine, whether it's based on compliance with NIST 853 or OWASP Top 10 or things like that, based on the architecture of our applications. Not only that, but how do we begin to integrate these things? So, if we take a look at, for example, threat modeling, the way we conduct threat modeling, how do we scale this out so that we can get more people involved when it comes to the threat modeling activities? Things like that become really, really important. So when I look at the internal challenges, the way I see this is the challenges has shifted. It used to be based on cost, and it used to be based on vendor lock-in and some of these kinds of things that are more operational based, and they've kind of moved into things that are more requirements and design based sort of in that space at this point. Not to suggest that operational activities and things are not important. They're just as important. That's exactly what DevOps does. But we're trying to make sure that we shift this over to the left as far as possible and catch this stuff early. And then when we kind of go through the pipelines, we start to see a lot of this stuff begin to kind of catch up, and we're building security from that starting point.
Interesting. Well, how long are you going to leave your poll open, Altez?
Yeah, I think we can we could go in and just, I think we can move on at this point. That's great.
Okay.
Sounds good. Yeah.
Yes, it's closed. You might need to close it on your end, Gary.
Okay, very good. I was hesitant to do it till I received my instructions.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I'm not sure if folks were able to see it, but we had folks that went in, and when we say the priority of cloud, we had 11 folks that said that it was high, and we had 5 folks that said it was medium. So, all right, let's keep going.
Yeah, that's just because I'm the researcher in the group, Altez. That's 70%. Well, as are you, but 70% are giving it high, and the remaining 30 giving it a medium, and nobody giving it a low priority. So we asked what drives cloud adoption in the apps developed. We had them rank 3 out of 5. Sorry, 3 out of 4 things here, and there you see the ranks. If you sort of add them up, the rank 1s all add to 100, rank 2s, etc. And what this helps us to do is just see the distribution that occurs, since everyone's able to give their top 1, 2, and 3 ranks. And as you can see, enabling a remote workforce, something you'd mentioned just a slide or 2 ago, comes out as the most prevalent number 1 key business driver. Cost is the chosen by some, but less than 1 in 5, and that is the least likely to be ranked as top 1. Comments or thoughts on it?
Yeah, it's interesting when we see enabling a remote workforce, right? So the business context today is about that remote workforce. How do we do this in a way that allows us to move forward? And cloud is a way that can help us to achieve that. And this really has security implications around what we talked about earlier when we look at things like zero trust as an example, and how we bring this stuff in and start to get security away from a broad set of rules into something that gets even more granular as we go into the level of dealing with security. It's really enabling that remote workforce starts to get into the creation of specific policies around who can access what, when can they access it, on what device can they access it, at what time potentially could they access it. And so there's this emergence of the next generation of thinking about security. It's not doing away with what we've done historically, but it's an evolution of the way that we think about security. And cloud enablement is really one of the events that's facilitating the rethinking of how we do security and moving away from that sort of perimeter-based model that we've got. I think the other thing that's important to think about here is the second one, which is bringing technology to market faster. This is something when you look at the ability from a cloud standpoint to go and rapidly instantiate things and be able to scale up and down as needed, this now begins to touch upon the operational risk of an organization. Not only that, but even when we take a look at it from a cost perspective, we don't over allocate or under allocate. We can always go in and scale up and down, which is one of the really attractive things about a cloud. And when we look at how you bring these two together, enablement of the remote workforce and at the same time bringing technology to market faster, these two things being the top two issues that they're looking at ultimately contribute to this third thing around increasing agility. We hear a lot about businesses saying we want to be agile, but what does that mean when we have to enable it? What does that mean when we have to operationalize it? Cloud can be an enabler for that agility. But as we talked about earlier, when you move to the cloud, there will be some challenges. We have to think about how we're going to do it. Let's be proactive in considering how we might enable security so that when we get to the cloud, we don't end up with a situation where the lack of security ends up inhibiting the business from moving forward, because that'll just undo this whole idea of bringing technology to market faster and agility and things like that. So these all kind of tie hand in hand together.
Interesting. Well, further to that, we wanted to know the priority of cloud adoption in 2021, and we did the poll. Our results from the poll very similar to what we saw here among our among the folks we surveyed, both in the U.S. and the U.K., highly knowledgeable in the subject as well. We see that over 8 out of 10 say it's the top priority this year.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think let's throw up that second poll as well and see what folks have to say about that. The idea that you go in, and we talked about some of the challenges that we've seen. When we look at cloud adoption, over half the applications are essentially being migrated over, and we've got about half of them that are being cloud native developed. Cloud is a top priority for this year to move forward. And when we look at how we could go in and govern this appropriately, this is where the space is at today. It is a systematic, well thought out plan to get us from where we are today to where we need to go, to have some hybrid combination of cloud enabled applications and on-premises applications, security model that overlays against both of these. And we can go in and we can now start to look for ways to begin to converge on how we could have security be a key part of adding value ultimately to what the business operations is all about. And that's, historically, when we look at security, it's usually something that was an afterthought, but this now represents that opportunity, given that it's a top priority, given that they're looking for some assistance from a cloud enablement standpoint. We really can do some great things here.
Fantastic. Shall I move on?
Yep. Move on now. We just close the poll and move on. Yep.
Okay, very good. Well, the security team is something you've mentioned, and we certainly wanted to understand the value that our respondents saw in their security team as allowing them or enabling them rather to to do cloud adoption for the applications that they develop. See some answers to to the previous poll. I'm just going to close that again, so you can see our slide here. You can see securing the cloud service configuration, clearly number one. Looking at improving time to market architectural patterns over to the right. All important business values, if you will, or value that security teams bring, but a clear sort of order of importance here. Your thoughts on it?
Yeah, absolutely. So this ties into this earlier discussion we had around accountability with senior stakeholders, right? This is what they want. This is the definition of the business value of the security team. There's a strong tie-in here when we look at cloud config, when we look at security guardrails and governance, security training, when we think about DevOps and DevSecOps. How does all of this now integrate when we look at the value that we need to produce over to what the senior stakeholders actually across the organization, what they're looking for? When we look at cloud to ground now and this hybrid infrastructure, the idea of having secure cloud service configuration, you can't effectively develop an application without having secure config, right? What we're doing is we now need to extend this over to the cloud. How are we going to do that when we end up with a hybrid infrastructure? Well, we're going to need security guardrails and governance to make that happen. Well, if we're going to have the governance in place, how are we going to know what capabilities we're going to need to build that governance model in? Well, we're going to need security training, right? And then we start to get into the real business value of the things that we address at the top level, at the board level, at the chief level, for example, which is around risk management, around regulatory compliance and things like that. So when I see this slide here and I look at the data, it matches with what was discussed earlier insofar as we are focused on developing our applications, migrating these applications into the cloud. We want to make sure that we configure these things securely. We want to develop the right governance structure around it. And we need to make sure that our folks are trained properly to go in there and manage security. Now, the sort of the fallout from this, when we get to ultimately what the business value is, once we settle this, it's going to come down to now we achieve that business agility that we're looking for at the end of the day, right? It's the risk forecasting, it's the regulatory compliance that we need to take a look at. And right now, when we look at a lot of the architectures that are evolving, unfortunately, we don't have an industry reference architecture around security that gives you this hybrid model. So in my discussions, I'm finding a lot of organizations they see it as important. They're focused on doing this, but it's being done largely independently. So we're trying as Security Compass to see if we can play our part to go out and to see if we might be able to collaborate with some people to help create some kind of a reference architecture. Now, we're not the only company in this space. There are others that are looking at this space too. And I think that represents the next stage of how this is going to evolve. When we start to take a look at cloud config, well, how is this going to integrate with some other cloud application or some other cloud service or some API somewhere else or something in the ground that we need to integrate with, right? These are all things now that become super important. And developing that reference architecture is a natural fallout once we identify the capabilities that we need. Once we know that, we know what systems we need to use, the systems get integrated, and out of that comes the reference architecture. So I'll just pause there because we could talk for a very long time on that. I'll just kind of leave it at that.
I'll just, one of the things that, that popped out for me when we're kind of correlating data points here is we're speaking to a lot of, folks who say this answers all the way up to the CTO. We saw that earlier. And then we gave them a list here of things that the security team brings to the table. Here's a CTO who's under a lot of pressure to get things migrated, to get product out. And, as they're under pressure, like how do we get things out there faster? It fascinates me that 39% are saying, oh, we'll bring in the security team. That will actually speed things up in terms of time to market. Comment? Am I right in seeing that is interesting, not a confounding result? To me, that confounded me at first. I'm like, I have this notion that security's there to say, whoa, everyone. Instead, it's like, hey, let's move faster here.
Yeah, there's a shift. Yeah, definitely. When in the discussions that I'm having, security is much more like stepping into that proactive role, starting to have discussions that are directly tied to business value. You know, and it'd be great if folks are, you know, in this community, in this particular webinar, if you've got thoughts and ideas on things that you've tried that work for you, feel free. I mean, share it with the folks that are on the webinar as well. But when you take a look at that, it really is ultimately coming to what do we now need to do to enable the rest of the organization? The challenges that we still have are that we don't have enough security folks. So we have to rethink some of the ways we do things, right? Does it take just a particular subset of individuals who can do a particular activity? Could we not automate that in some way? Could we not go and see if we might be able to train others to do it? And this is where we saw the emergence of the security champion. The security champion emerges from the dev side, allows us to go in and intersect with what's happening on the security side. You know, we could keep those kinds of programs going. When I take a look and see what's happening at the Linux Foundation, for example, with their badge program, they're encouraging their development community to go in and take a look at security as well from their perspective. Self-attestation is the model they've decided to use. You know, what we're suggesting is that as time goes on, you're probably going to find that automation is going to become an increasing part of how we conduct security. So looking at manual approaches to doing security, you know, we're going to have to rethink some of this. So with NIST 853, for example, being available in digital format, you know, like as an XML format or something like that, you know, we're having some discussions with some people talking about how we might be able to go and even from an integration standpoint, be able to take some of the security artifacts that we've got and make them more reusable across these DevOps pipelines. So that's kind of where we're seeing things going at this point, and you know, would love to hear, are others seeing the same thing or not?
Interesting. Well, let's look at different approaches, and to your point around how can we speed things up? How can we take what we've got and accelerate it? An interest in automation obviously is key. So we asked, you know, which by design, proactive security and/or compliance processes does your company perform during software development? And you can see almost 72% are saying risk assessments. I just followed it at that. I always like to look at one end and then the other. I'll test. We've got 39%, just 39% doing threat modeling as a, again, it might be more than that who do it, but as a by design and proactive security or compliance process. You know, just 4 out of 10 doing threat modeling. Anything else pop out for you here?
Yeah, absolutely. This to me just screams DevSecOps. Totally. If you look at what we're trying to do in terms of the processes, when we see things like compliance by design, secure coding guidelines, to me, this is a clear narrative that we've already started to see the convergence of compliance in software development, right? It's not just a technical activity. The minute we started to bring in security, we now had to introduce some of these other areas that came in. And so now when we look at how we're seeing this convergence of compliance and software development occurring, now the question is, how do we go in and how do we extend this further, right? So we see now that it's not just about compliance with security, but it's compliance with privacy. Eventually, it's compliance with ethics now, right? And so software development as an activity, as a value stream, is becoming increasingly important as we inject even more business-related activities requirements into these pipelines with the intent of helping the business now differentiate itself and compete in the marketplace, be more agile, and so on and so forth. So one thing that I see here, which is that threat modeling is like at 39%. You know, my experience has been that generally threat modeling is in fact not even that high. So, you know, the challenge has been, as we've dug a little bit deeper in the threat modeling space, is how do you go in there and provide, number one, consistency? If we produce, let's say, a threat modeling diagram as an example, and then you give it to another team and they produce a different diagram, or they come up with a different set of mitigations as an example, this makes it really difficult to try and assess the risk and the security from a proactive perspective. So we need to fall back on some level of abstraction, some way to go in there and construct the mitigations. And a lot of the threat modeling discussions ultimately the goal is to try and produce mitigations and provide options to the business so that they can make a decision on which one of these options makes sense, and weigh that against, do we need to go in there and gather our extra insurance? Are we going to fund the resolution for this? Like, however we're going to solve this. So I think, to me, threat modeling right now is an area of immense interest. There's a lot of people talking about threat modeling. So I expect that through, given all the brain power that's going into threat modeling, we will start to see some things emerging in the threat modeling space, which will give us the ability to inject it a little bit easier into the development workflow. So it's not like a data flow diagram, and then it's like, now what do I do with the data flow diagram insofar as it relates to requirements? There's a bit of a mismatch in the artifacts themselves. Now, there's some legacy reasons for that type of stuff, which I won't get into, but it's, this is the kind of thing when we talk about the value stream, it is coming through a reference architecture with the integrations that we see all of these things now being integrated in every step of the pipeline offering value. So when you look at risk assessment, secure coding, compliance, privacy by design, every one of these exists in the pipeline, and we check it. And then, if something fails and goes against the guardrails or goes below the guardrails, there's a decision that needs to get made. Was it the policy that was wrong? Do we need to train people? Do we need to create a new integration? Do we need to modify something? Do we need to re-architect? And these are the kinds of discussions where, because of the data that is being provided by security teams, we now have business folks that can utilize that insight to say, aha, now I know what I need to carry forward. I'll just pause there because there's a lot we can talk on that too.
Yeah, and just to let your audience know, we did some separate research drilling in just on threat modeling, and so it's again something you're obviously very, very knowledgeable of, and you really understand the trends. And for our audience, we can offer them up afterwards further research that is being conducted on your behalf on the topic.
Yeah, let me just pause for a moment. There was a question that did come in here. Do you see organizations spreading the vendor risk by migrating direct to multi-cloud vendors from their data centers, or is that more of a trend once they establish a cloud presence? So I'll share my thoughts on this. There's a risk when you go in and you've got a single vendor. The challenge, however, when you look at multi-cloud vendors is the development effort to go in and manage multiple cloud vendors when you've got, for example, different APIs, because there's no standardized way of accessing services as of yet. No POSIX standard or something like that for the cloud. Not to suggest that work isn't being worked on, but that becomes part of the challenge. Now, it's possible to go in there and create an abstraction layer where you can go and say, okay, we will go and create an adapter across multiple cloud deployments, for example. That's great. That's one way that you can look at it from an architecture standpoint. From my perspective, what I've seen is we don't typically see everybody doing everything in one cloud. We usually see a spread, but it's a spread not based on the same application, but it's different sets of services. So we might do something in an Azure cloud, for example, and then have a different set of services offered on AWS, for example. So it's that kind of thing, and not so much about we're going to create two instances across two different clouds and create this sort of cloud-to-cloud integration from an application perspective. Now, not to suggest it can't be done with containers and that level of abstraction. It gives us the opportunity to now go in and reinstantiate in a different cloud setting, but it's not something that we are seeing that a lot of folks are doing, right? So there's training issues with that. You have to go and people need to understand how this cloud vendor works and how this cloud vendor works. And so there's some of these challenges that sort of emerges. Keep the questions coming as well, please. Don't hesitate. I hope that answered the question. If not, just ping us again. I'm more than happy to go in the direction that you think we need to go to. Gary?
Thank you. Great question. So what percentage of people are interested in a solution that automates the proactive security, and real emphasis here on proactive security and compliance processes? When we cross-tabulate that or correlate that back to our other question around, what percentage are you expecting to migrate to the cloud in the next 2 years, we find some interesting results. So no one disagrees, or no one is not interested, if I put it in the negative. No one doesn't want automation, Altez. But the folks who want it the most, who strongly agree, as you can see here, are the ones that are expecting to migrate. If you look to the far right, almost 9 out of 10 applications to the cloud in the next 2 years. So the result here is that the more you expect to migrate to the cloud, the more you desire and need automation.
Yeah. This is key. This is another area. If you look at the DevOps landscape today, and you look at all the categories of tools that exist. We've got issue tracking systems, we've got testing systems, we've got value streams, all these things in there. Where's the category that handles proactive security and compliance? It's a gap in the current categories within DevOps, right? It's important. People are looking for it, but there's no easy way to go in there and integrate security and compliance with our current DevOps tools that we've got. So if you imagine at the project level, we've got teams that are working at the project level, and they might, for example, ingest through an issue tracking system. They might go through the pipelines and use an orchestration system from a deployment standpoint. And then we basically monitor it from the infrastructure side once it's deployed. And then we have a round trip back from a DevOps standpoint. We need something above that. How do we instrument that pipeline and be able to pull out and extract relevant information that's related to security and compliance? We've got discrete pieces of data. We might run a SAST scan. We might go in there and do something with DAST, for example. We might even do a pen test, right? But the information that exists at the project level isn't really integrated, right? We could pull all this and put it into a data lake somewhere and go in and say, okay, let's put a cube around this and let's now sort of slice and dice this stuff. But that's not something that's going to work in the long term, because you need to be able to do this in a way where you've got policies that you need to inject into that level, which is at the program level, and be able to take that and convert those policies into actionable procedures that your DevOps pipeline teams are going to execute against. So this is where data like this, when you look at the need that exists out there, there are tools that are emerging to help to manage proactive security and compliance. For example, if you look at a lot of the infrastructure as code communities, they're really looking at compliance and security from the perspective of the code that they create, and suggesting ways to go in and say, for example, if you want to be compliant with NIST 853 or something, what are the specific things you need to do in your infrastructure to be able to go and to adhere to that policy? The challenge, of course, is what do you do with that to bring it back to say we have in fact complied with this? There's no automated integration that exists, right? We've got an infrastructure as code piece, like whatever, we've got YAML or something, but how do you integrate that with a policy? There's a gap between the policy creation life cycles and what's happening in the software development life cycles, the DevOps life cycles. And so we're witnessing now the emergence of these tools that are going to go and help to balance this idea of moving across these DevOps pipelines very quickly and balancing that against security. So it's this balanced development platforms that are kind of in this space emerging at this point.
Excellent. Well, we asked similarly about interest in a solution based on how many are in the cloud. Again, we see no one disagrees, everyone wants it, sure. And a strong degree of interest on those who have a high percentage of applications in the cloud. So I think just really reinforcement of the points you already made, but any new insights from what you see for people who already have actively got applications being built in the cloud?
Yeah, to me, when you look at a process that already exists, which indicates that you've got these applications already in the cloud, so you clearly have pipelines at this point, there's a great degree of interest now to ensure that you've got this compliance built into the pipelines. And to me, if you take this at one level higher, what this data tells me is that we really are looking at going back to the value stream question. Right? We cannot leave this idea that the business is out there and we've got technical teams doing something that doesn't align. We are converging and we're bringing these things together. How do we as a security team facilitate that discussion? And we do it by focusing on what that value stream is. Our DevOps teams are doing an amazing job to go in there and create this stuff. What can we do to help them so they don't diverge further and further from offering the value that the business is looking for? Right, so it's this in-between space, and it's that value stream discussion that talks about let's add value at every step of the way, which is driven through the requirements, it's driven through the compliance, it's driven through the security. It's these types of things that now become much, much more important. So I'll just pause there. I know we're coming up against time here, Gary. We could talk more, but I'll hand it over to you. Is there anything else?
No, that's it. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, but I do want to say thank you to all of our participants. And we've got lots more that we asked about. There's lots more results, but I think you timed that perfectly, Altaz, in terms of what we were able to cover today. So those who are interested in learning more, those who want to see other findings from the research or other solutions you have, well, what should they do?
Yeah, by all means. Raquel, you want to take it from here? You give us, bring us to a land?
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you both again to our speakers, Altaz and Gary, for an engaging and informative session. Thank you to our attendees, of course, for being here today. And once again, we will be sharing today's recording via email. And as the webinar closes, you will be taken to our 2021 State of Cloud Adoption ebook. If you have any questions for our speakers or anyone on the Security Compass team, please email contact@securitycompass.com. For upcoming webinars, please check out the resources section of our website to learn more and register. And if you like podcasts, please check out The Balancing Act, where we interview people who have meaningful things to say about security and are not afraid to speak out. So thank you all so much for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we will see you next time.
Thank you.